Hello, everyone. I'm Aarti Bagul. I'm a machine learning engineer at Snorkel AI, and today I'm going to talk to you about data-centric AI in practice. So let's start with what even is data-centric AI. It's a term that's become very popular recently, and a lot of you may be confused and wondering, well, hasn't data always been a part of machine learning and AI development? Because that's what you build machine learning models on. So what really is different here? Well, the best way to explain this would be to contrast it with a model-centric AI development workflow, which is how we have been developing machine learning models so far. So, if you asked a number of machine learning practitioners for a very long time, what they were spending most of their time on, it would be iterating on the models. So given a training data set that they've collected or a large academic benchmark out there, a lot of people are just spending their time iterating on the models. And what this means is they would either come up with or try out new model architectures, try different features for feature engineering, try different hyperparameters. And that was mostly the focus of machine learning and AI development. So getting the training data set was sort of seen as a before step to even getting started with machine learning. And once you do get started, training data was seen as sort of a static asset, and you just iterate on the models. And this made sense for the longest time because we did not have powerful machine learning models or architectures that worked for a large variety of tasks. So these large academic benchmarks that were released really accelerated the development of a lot of these model architectures that we use today. And that was the focus of a lot of ML practitioners, which was coming up with these models that just even worked. But now that we have these powerful machine learning models, and frankly, they've become very commoditized and very easy to use, what people have realized is iterating on the models has started giving diminishing returns. So to give you a concrete example, some of my colleagues worked on a project with Stanford Medicine, which was around classifying X-ray images. And what they realized was after a certain point, iterating on the model itself gave maybe less than a 1-point difference in performance. But iterating on the data itself, which is having the subject matter experts, in this case doctors, go back and review the X-rays or the data itself, gave a 8 to 9-point difference in performance. So really, across the board, people are realizing that nowadays, training data is the key differentiator and really what should be the focus of iterating on for machine learning and AI development. And of course, this is not a either or. To successfully build machine learning applications, you would need to iterate on both your data as well as your models. But this has really been a key shift in terms of even seeing the data as something that needs to be iterated on and something that needs to be a focus of iteration in terms of machine learning and AI development. Now, of course, this comes with its own set of challenges. Since models have become very commoditized and very easy to use, iterating on the model itself is usually very quick. So in this case, the specific case that I had mentioned, my colleagues observed that just trying out different model architectures would take you maybe a day or two, in terms of experimenting. But iterating on the data itself is a lot more challenging. One, because you need to bring in these subject matter experts or doctors and have them review and spend time looking at the data. And iterating on the data itself is a lot slower, right? In this case, it took about 8 to 9 months to iterate on the data. And overall, just manual labeling makes this whole process even slower, where by manual labeling, I mean, going through each data point one at a time and then labeling each data point one at a time. So looking at each X-ray and saying, what is this disease type, or looking at each document. This manually labeling each data point is a very ineffective use of subject matter experts' time. It is very slow, it does not scale, and it just overall leads to a very broken machine learning and AI development workflow. So not just is it really slow to get the initial training data set, once you train a model, it's really slow and expensive to go back and iterate. And once you are happy with the machine learning model, and once you deploy it, it's difficult to adapt, again, because of the slow and expensive nature of manual labeling to go back and iterate on your data. So over this talk, I'm going to talk about a new approach that we've pioneered here at Snorkel called programmatic labeling. And I'm going to tell you how this makes data-centric AI workflows possible and a lot more feasible. So I'll talk about first what programmatic labeling is and how that leads to significantly faster data labeling. So in this case, 10 to 100 times faster, actually. And what that lets you do is also when you do train a model, it lets you very effectively go back and iterate on your data, not just your model. And I'll also talk about some error analysis tools that we've developed and techniques to let you do that because of this programmatic labeling approach, as well as once you're happy with a good machine learning model and you do deploy it, how do you monitor for drift once that is deployed? And then how the programmatic labeling approach lets you continue to maintain your models over time and adapt to, let's say, changing business needs or changes in your data. So let's start with what is programmatic labeling. The key idea behind programmatic labeling is instead of labeling each data point one at a time, so let's say for a given email, instead of saying this one is spam, this one is not, this one is spam, this one is not, and doing that tens of thousands of times, you can encode your labeling rationale or why you think something should be labeled a certain way. So in this case, let's say I could say if it contains the word wire transfer, it's probably a spam. So you're encoding this rule or heuristic about a class, and that lets you label a large amount of data all at once instead of labeling it one at a time. And these labeling functions could take different forms, right? I just gave a simple one, which is, if send money is in the email or if wire transfer is in the email. But you could also use other types of labeling functions. You can say, if a spell checker finds some spelling errors, or if my sender is in some database, or even bring in a model that you have trained already, or existing crowd worker labels that you have. The idea is just that you are encoding, your subject matter expertise or even existing resources into functions instead of explicitly labeling each data point. And again, as I mentioned, this could be as simple as a simple phrase all the way to an external model that you may have already trained. And what you may have noticed is, some of these functions could be imprecise, right? Like maybe wire transfer does occur in an email that is not spam, or one of your colleagues maybe is just not that good at spelling, and there is a lot of spelling errors in a lot of their legitimate emails. And the thing here is that Snorkel Flow and the technology that we've developed is able to take in these noisy labeling functions. So these functions that can be conflicting, they can be correlated, and we have a label model that even without any hand labeled data or ground truth can figure out how to weight these labeling functions and denoise them to get you to one label per training data point. So let's say, if you have two of your functions say it's spam, one of them say it's not, what is the actual label? Instead of just, doing majority vote, we have more sophisticated techniques that we've developed at Snorkel that let you denoise these labeling functions very effectively and get you to a label per training data point. Amazing. So hopefully you can see how this programmatic labeling approach lets you encode subject matter expertise in a much more effective way and label a large amount of data really, really quickly instead of manual labeling, which is quite slow. The next step in this programmatic labeling workflow is to train a model. So to explain why this is part of the workflow and necessary, first we're writing these functions that may cover a certain part of your data, and as I mentioned, you're labeling a number of data points all at once instead of one at a time with these labeling functions. And again, to highlight, these could be conflicting, they could be correlated, but when we train a label model in Snorkel, that gives one label per training data point. So we automatically denoise these functions to get you to the state. Then when you train a machine learning model, and we have really powerful machine learning models these days, it can pick up on other signal in your data, let's say other text in the email or other features that you provide, and it may start generalizing beyond these labeling functions or rules that you've written very effectively. So that's why we write some functions to label a large amount of data all at once, but then we do leverage powerful machine learning models to already start generalizing beyond the labeling functions that we've just written. Great, so now let's talk about what analyzing this model looks like such that you can iterate on not just your model, but also your data. So in Snorkel Flow, we provide specific error analysis tools that make it really easy to iterate using this programmatic labeling approach. But really, the way to iterate on this programmatic labeling approach is a whole new way, right? Because there's multiple things you could be doing in terms of iterating on either your functions, iterating on your data, iterating on your model. So what really should you be doing next? So in Snorkel Flow, and this is just one of the many tools that we provide, we show you how your model is doing versus your labeling functions or programmatic labels on a held out validation set that is hand labeled. So you always want to evaluate on ground truth hand labeled data, which is generally a much smaller sample than the large amount of training data sets that you have. But we make it very easy for you to see what you should be doing next. And so it's a whole new way of iterating where you can see, well, let's focus on where your model is incorrect. If your model is incorrect, what should you be doing next? Well, if your labeling functions are also incorrect, go back and fix those functions. I mentioned these functions can be noisy. We don't really need to care about it. But using the error analysis tools that we have, you actually at this stage can see if that is causing an issue and if you need to go back and iterate on these functions. Or if the model is incorrect and the functions are correct, then you need to iterate on your model itself. Try different model architectures, different hyperparameters. And this is where we show you, how many of those documents you need to do that for. This is where people spend all of their time. They just assume their data is good, it's a static asset, and then continue iterating on their models. But here you can see how much of your errors are because of that. And in this case, you could be also iterating on the part of the data where the model is incorrect and the labeling functions don't apply because maybe, the keywords that you specified are not present in those documents. You would go back and write labeling functions for that specific part of the data. So hopefully you can see it's not just that you label data really fast with programmatic labeling, but once you label data really fast and then train a model, you can use the model to see, should you be iterating on your model? Should you be iterating on your data? If so, what part of your data? And then go iterate based off of that, either fixing labeling functions, iterating on the model, or writing new labeling functions, and exactly see which part you need to focus on. So you would do that in a very methodical way, because at each point, you're doing targeted error analysis to look at specific parts of your data or iterating on your model, but really knowing what you should be doing next instead of just throwing different models at the problem or throwing different hyperparameters. So you would get to a good model really quickly and effectively using this approach. And then once you're ready to deploy the model, you can also use the programmatic labeling approach to quickly monitor and adapt your model once it's deployed. So quickly, and in Snorkel Flow, we enable this. You can see how your model is predicting over time and see at what point you need to update your model, either based on changes that you're seeing in your data or changes out in real world data or changes in business goals. And this programmatic labeling approach lets you adapt to changes in the data or business goals really effectively. To contrast this, let's say if you had manual labeling, if something changed, let's say you have new classes that you care about, or something changed in the distribution, so you need to account for a new class. If anything changes, you need to manually go back and individually review each single data point and relabel every single data point. So again, this manual labeling bottleneck that we'd seen earlier, just you need to redo the whole work all over again. But with labeling functions, if you need to account for a new class or update your training data set, all you need to do is update a couple of functions and then apply the functions to your data set. And this process takes minutes instead of redoing the whole work with manual labeling. So hopefully you can see how programmatic labeling enables this data-centric AI development workflow, such that it lets you not just label data really, really quickly, but it also lets you, once you train a model, iterate very effectively in terms of analyzing where the model is not performing well and figuring out what you should be doing next. And then also once you deploy the model, it also makes it really easy to adapt to changes in either the data or the business goal and quickly relabel your entire training data set and then keep your models up to date. This is something that we've spent years researching and developing. So Snorkel was a research project at Stanford for a number of years. We have over 50 academic papers that have been written about this, and we've developed and deployed this technology with a large number of organizations across different sectors. And a large number of organizations have been able to realize business value with Snorkel Flow, our commercial product that enables this workflow that I just described. And so some organizations are able to develop ML applications about 90 times faster using this programmatic labeling approach. And it's not just that it's fast, it's that these are pretty high quality models as well, because you're able to label a large amount of data really quickly. And with amazing, powerful machine learning models, given more data, they're also able to do really well. So it's fast development of high quality machine learning models. And this just leads to an overall lower cost in terms of developing machine learning applications. So a Fortune 500 biotech company estimated that this workflow developed by Snorkel Flow saved them about 10 million in manual labeling costs. Does not mean that they were planning to spend 10 million in terms of manually labeling the data. It's prohibitive in terms of even getting started. So you can see how Snorkel Flow reduces the cost, not just for existing applications, but maybe unlocks applications that would not have been possible because of the prohibitive cost of manual labeling. And with that, let me talk a little about some of the applications that we've developed in the real world with some of our customers. This will be a small subset, but hopefully gives you an idea of how this looks like in action. So the first example, a Fortune 500 company wanted to automate and accelerate their underwriting process with Snorkel Flow. So I gave you throughout this presentation example of classification tasks, given documents, you want to classify something, but we also support extraction tasks in Snorkel Flow. And the research for this has been done on images as well, and something that we're planning to support in our roadmap. But in this case, they wanted to extract multiple different information or attributes from these web pages. So in this case, let's say the business type, the location, the phone number, etc. And by their estimate, it would have taken 72 person months to hand label the data. You can see how this is a very long time to ask of subject matter experts who have actual real jobs that doesn't just involve, labeling the data. And with manual labeling, you can't even get started without labeling this data. And then once you do train a model, it's really slow to go back and iterate here. But with Snorkel Flow and programmatic labeling in this new approach, they were able to programmatically label 100,000 documents really, really quickly with this approach. And again, it's not just that it's really fast, they're also able to get really high quality models. So greater than 90F1 here in terms of getting the model, getting a model for extracting various information. It's a 4 times faster model creation because of this workflow, and a 90% reduction in cost with no loss to quality. So hopefully you can see in the real world how this programmatic labeling approach, which powers this data-centric AI development process, gives you gains in, just like being able to label a large amount of data really quickly, getting high quality models, reduce cost. To give you another example, Genentech wanted to extract different types of information from a clinical trial document. So a clinical trial document, really large document, comes in a wide variety of formats, contains a lot of valuable information. And in this case, they wanted to extract what is the inclusion-exclusion criteria for a clinical trial. So it's a very important piece of information for designing clinical trials, which has implications on the safety of the clinical trial, as well as the success and the cost associated with the clinical trial. It's really important. As well as extract, let's say, the schedule of assessments or the procedures that were conducted with during the trial, to also then figure out how that's correlated to a clinical trial success. So they estimated that in this case, if they wanted to manually label the data to then train a machine learning model, it would take 140 subject matter experts a month to label the training data sets. Again, that's prohibitive because subject matter experts in this case are clinical scientists. To ask 140 clinical scientists to take away a month of their time to label the data is just not feasible. But with Snorkel Flow, they were able to label 340,000 documents really quickly using this approach. And again, really high quality models, not just the speed of development. And I think what's important to highlight is also when their label schema changed. So let's say they wanted to extract some different set of chronic conditions from this inclusion-exclusion criteria, it only took a day to relabel the entire data set and maintain this machine learning model, right? Which you can see, it's not just that the initial development process is faster, but adapting to changes in label schema is also really fast with this programmatic labeling approach. With that, hopefully you've had a great overview of what is data-centric AI, how programmatic labeling enables this data-centric AI approach, and some examples of this in the real world. And with that, thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My email is aarti@snorkel.ai. I've also provided my Twitter handle. You can also reach out on LinkedIn. Would love to hear from you if you have any questions. Thank you.